what's happening at the moment and what's happening in the future to really sort of update you. So fine, hopefully that's moving on. So hello, my name's Ian Lewins, for those of you who've not met me. And I think it's really important to put faces to names, and it's something that we talk about with the foundation doctors an awful lot. So this is me. This is what I look like sort of in my day job on the left, with my beautiful, I think it's unicorn headband, and then that's me on the right, celebrating yet another Liverpool victory with my son there. So that's what I look like. So you now know what I look like. Please, I've just been asked, can I make sure that everybody signs in with their names, so for the certificate later you will get that for your CPD. So we're going to talk through a little bit of a foundation programme update, and I think that Tony Choules is also in on this meeting, so he can maybe add some bits and pieces at the end if necessary. So it's September the 1st, it's beautifully sunny outside, so we must start thinking about Christmas and getting the Christmas shopping done, and I'm sure in the M&S in the foyer they've started putting their bits up. So I'm well known for my delightful, charming persona.
Sorry, some people can't see the presentation. I can, but some people are saying that they can't. Oh,
right. Okay, I can. So you can, but some people can't. Okay. Right.
So another couple of people are saying that they can. Most people can see it.
Most people can. So I'm going to carry on if that's all right. I can switch to.
Is it worth logging out and logging back in again and see if that helps?
Yeah. So if you can't see it, log out, log in, I would suggest. And most people looking on the side can see it. So I'll crack on because most of it are silly pictures. Fine, and Nav can see it as well. And Jill's just joined me. Great. Okay, so let's carry on. So Scrooge-like, we're going to talk about Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future, or foundation past, foundation present, and foundation future. So past. What have we just passed? What have we just had passed? So we've obviously recently completed the 2020 ARCP process, and as I'm sure if you'll be well aware, if you look after foundation doctors, the goalposts were significantly changed in line to allow them to meet the standards that were changed because of the ongoing sort of pandemic. This did cause some concern for us in the foundation team, but this has been a national directive to say actually the standard that we're going to ask the foundation doctors has changed significantly. And of all the doctors that we had at Derby in F1 and F2, all passed this new standard. As far as we are aware, the standards have now reverted to what they were pre-COVID. So it's what we were doing before. And just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight for you as supervisors that help us in the ARCP is to please, for your trainees, rate their curriculum. This is something that they should be asking you to do, but frequently gets overlooked or missed. So we end up having to do it during the ARCP. So please do rate the curriculum. And I think over the coming years, this is going to be more and more important and relevant. And the other thing that I would say is that there are things that need your approval for the ARCP. So things like the signing off for the simulation certificates and the prescribing safety assessment. Please approve those in advance as your in your role as supervisors. That would really help us. What else have we had going on in the near past? Well, we've had these FI1 placements, and obviously these were thrown on us a little short notice. In Derby, we had just over 20 FIY1s, of which 6 have remained. And the feedback that we had from the FIY1s who were with us was overwhelmingly positive, and all of them said that they felt very well supported. Oh, can people mute their microphones, please? I can just hear a little bit in the background. So FIY1s were these foundation interim year ones. So these were essentially medical students who were asked, who were not clinical, and were asked if they would start their F1 jobs early. And I felt sorry for a lot of these because they were slightly sold something that was never going to be delivered. I think they were slightly led to believe that they would be charging in to save the NHS from collapse. But of course, when you read the finer detail, these people were ideally not placed in COVID type areas. So I did feel a bit sorry for them. Of the 20 that we had in Derby, we've had 6 stay on. And importantly for these people, for their 2021 ARCP next year, they can use any experiences and learning SLEs, DOPS, BKEX, those sorts of things for their portfolio. I'm just going to try and mute everyone because there's still loads of noise in the background. Okay. Sorry, somewhat off-putting. So they can count their experiences, but what they can't do is shorten their training. So they can't say, well, I started 2 months early, I'd like to leave 2 months early. They will still have to do the pro rata 12 months training. And we've not had any questions about that. So I think things will stand as they are. There was a really useful survey that Mr. Tambay and team did for the F1s, looking at their sort of degree of anxiety. And it's interesting that many of the incoming F1s have had lots of concerns about they've not been clinical for a while and they've missed out on the FIY1 experience. So many of the F1s that you've got at the moment will not have done anything clinical for quite some time as medical school was suspended. And you guys are so supportive with the foundation doctors, and I would just reiterate our thanks, but also ask you to be particularly vigilant for the F1s at the moment who are feeling particularly sort of vulnerable. We have reached out to them a lot to sort of say we understand your concerns, we understand your anxieties, and we will do what we can to sort of help with them. But please be aware that this is something that is an issue for them at the moment. What else has been happening in the Christmas past? Well, you'll be aware that for the FY doctors, they had no rotation 3. So what this meant was that they did placement 1, placement 2, and for the vast majority stayed in their placement 2 for their placement 3. We did within the trust have approximately a quarter of the foundation year doctors redeployed, pretty much all to medicine. And again, a nice bit of work from Mr. Tambay and colleagues looking at levels of anxiety. Interestingly, there were greater levels of anxiety amongst the foundation doctors who weren't redeployed rather than the ones who were redeployed. And actually the ones who were redeployed to medicine felt very well supported and inducted and knew what they were doing. So that's great credit to sort of Lindsay Chesterton and everybody else in the medicine team. There is something on the UK FPO website, so that's the UK Foundation Programme website, that I would encourage you to have a look at and encourage your F1s to fill in. And that's a medical graduate research study looking at the experiences of the F1s during the COVID period. And that would be really helpful data to encourage. We will obviously pass that on to the F1s, but if you can reinforce that in your role as either educational or clinical supervisors, that would be most helpful. So that's clinical experiences in the past. Teaching experiences have obviously changed in the last year as well. We previously measured teaching by, we have a core series of lectures that many of you get involved with on Tuesday lunchtime for the F1s and Thursday lunchtime for the F2s. And the expectation was that the foundation doctors would attend approximately 70% of their teaching, of their core teaching. And the foundation program looked at this and said maybe that's not quite right, because a lot of these trainees are getting really useful experience in their speciality placements and lots of teaching there, and we should be counting this. So over the last year we switched to this idea of core and non-core teaching for the foundation doctors, and what the foundation doctors have to do is log all the teaching that they get. And they need to be doing in the 12 months a total of minimum of 60 hours of teaching, of which 30 should be the core teaching. And that's the core teaching that we provide from the foundation programme on the Tuesdays and Thursdays. The non-core are all the other clinical meetings that they attend. So if you have a grand round, if you have a journal club, any teaching that they go to, they can count and they have to log. And the idea is to say a total of 60 hours with a minimum of 30 core. And we were a little concerned that many of the trainees wouldn't achieve this potentially. Now, with the sort of COVID situation and the changing of the ARCP standard, essentially that was got rid of. But when we reviewed all the portfolios, actually the vast majority of trainees managed still to get to at least 30 hours of core teaching and 30 hours of non-core. So this seems to be a better way of going forward. Obviously, a lot of the face-to-face teaching disappeared at the start of the pandemic, and we switched over fairly quickly to using Microsoft Teams to carry on with the teaching to the F1s and F2s. And that's something that for the time being, we're going to continue forward. Interestingly, we found that we had much better attendance using remote teaching than we did with the face-to-face, and actually polling the foundation doctors, that they had greater satisfaction with getting this. So it's something that I think even when we are back to doing face-to-face completely teaching, we're allowed to, we'll still be continuing with the Microsoft Teams for the time being. And we certainly did the induction for the incoming F1s and F2s as a mixture of both remote and face-to-face teaching. So that's what's been going on in the past. We'll just enjoy this picture of us lifting the UEFA Super Cup and then move on to things in the present. So I think it's useful to know, for you to know as a supervisor, what we actually offer as the foundation TPDs and the foundation TPD team. And we run a very much an open door policy, along with ourselves, myself and Dr. McCulloch, and the postgraduate team and the FPCs, so that the foundation doctors know that they can email me, and we do respond pretty much within 24 hours every single time, but they can come up to the offices and have a chat if they've got stuff that they're concerned about, that they feel that they can't necessarily speak to their clinical supervisor or educational supervisors about. So we do try and be as open as we can with the doctors. We hold meetings with them to get feedback, and we do this at the end of every rotation. And we do this in the midpoint of every rotation. So we have 6 meetings a year with them to give feedback. And that's probably the most nerve-wracking thing I do currently. So I sit and I face, or have been facing, sort of 40 to 50 occasionally quite angry doctors, and they vent on me and I sort of try and take things forward. So if you ever want a sort of a lesson in masochism, please come along and join me at that. Interestingly, when we do our sessions and try and get the concerns, the vast majority of their concerns are either leave or rota concerns. So, and there's not an awful lot I can do about that, other than encourage them, if there are issues about their hours, etc., to exception report. And no matter how many times we seem to emphasise how important exception reporting is, many of them seem quite reluctant. And when you try and drill down what's stopping you, interestingly, it's not the fear of the consultant saying don't exception report. It's often actually their peers and or immediate superiors saying, oh, you shouldn't exception report, you'll get into trouble. And we re-emphasize this, and I would ask you to continue to do this, to re-emphasize that actually it's a really useful tool for us to see where the problems are, and it gives us some evidence to try and do things about this. So please encourage the trainees to exception report when appropriate. Because many of their concerns and gripes are largely about rotas, I take the rota coordinator people along with me, and they try and answer most of their concerns. But on the whole, the vast majority of the feedback is largely positive, and many of the doctors feel well supported by their colleagues and senior colleagues and consultants. We also have, as part of that, a quarterly postgraduate ops meeting, and this is myself, Dr. McCulloch, the postgraduate team, along with Dr. Tinklin as the DME, but also the foundation year reps. So we typically have 3 to 4 F1s, 3 to 4 F2s who act as representatives for their colleagues. So if there are issues that a foundation doctor feels that they can't approach us or approach you as their supervisors, we have representatives that they can approach who will can sort of say anonymously, this is what our concern is and what we can try and investigate. So if you're feeling that there's a doctor who's got an issue that they just can't disclose to you or us, then the rep may be a way forward. So that's how we sort of interact with the foundation doctors, and it's quite a lot of interaction as foundation TPDs. And as I mentioned, the incoming F1s, it was interesting when they were allocated to us. I received several emails from concerned medical students, as they were at the time, saying we are really worried that we're not going to be up to standard, we're not going to be good enough, we've not been clinical for a long time. And one of the incoming ones did a region-wide survey to sort of try and gauge people's levels of anxiety, which unsurprisingly were high. It's not something that we've done before, so we had no sort of baseline to compare to, but you could see that they were worried, those who'd not done the interim jobs, that they weren't going to be up to speed. So we've met and we've discussed this at length with a lot of the foundation doctors, and we're trying to put in place additional help for them to try and support them over this period. I think they will settle down very quickly, as many of the foundation doctors do. I'm sure if you remember your first day as a doctor and the overwhelming feeling of anxiety, and we can sort of say, well, okay, this is normal and this is okay, and it will settle down. Some doctors and some medical students have ongoing health concerns, and what they do is they fill in something called a STEP form. This is a form that they self-declare, I have this ongoing health, physical health or mental health concern, and I meet with all of them, and I've met with all of the F1s who've made a declaration to just sort of go through, are there any things in place that they need us to do, to refer them to occupational health if necessary, or the professional support unit. So they are in hand, and we keep them on our dashboard to just make sure that we check in with them from time to time to make sure they're still okay. We will have some delayed starters as well, so people who have trained in this country and have gone back home overseas and are now stuck, and we have, I think, a couple of delayed starters, both of whom are coming from Bahrain, who have a policy of essentially one flight out a month that you have to apply to get on. So we have a starter coming in September, and then somebody else coming in November or December, and obviously we will pick them up and put in place what they need to, and the teams that they're coming to have already been alerted that these people are going to be late starters. So these are some of the incoming F1 issues. We also have the incoming F2s who've also got worries and concerns. Just to sort of highlight to you, one of the big concerns has been, because of the pandemic, as you say, we stuck with this, people staying in rotation 2 and not moving on to rotation 3. And there are obviously people who have been particularly looking forward to rotation 3, or have picked this whole rotation based on the third rotation in my F1 year was the one I really wanted to do, really get experience, and I've now missed out on this. And we did have queries at the time saying, look, can I swap into this? And at sort of a slightly above my pay grade, the view was, no, we need to be fair to everybody and keep that there. And people accepted that, and it's moved on. But now, as things are relaxing and things are returning back to normal, we are getting increasing queries of, well, I missed out on this rotation I really want to do. Is there any chance that I can do this in my F2 year? And if you get anybody that's thinking about that or wants to discuss it, can you point them my way? We are potentially looking at whether we can accommodate appropriate swaps for people who've missed out on the rotation that they want to do. It's not something that we're going to wave and shout and advertise about, because it could end up with complete chaos. But if there are people who are worried or concerned, can you point them in my direction, and we can sort of meet and have a sit and have a chat about what we can do to accommodate this? Because obviously these people will soon be applying for their specialist training run-through jobs, and if they've come to you with concerns about, well, I've missed out on this, I've not had experience, and I'm not quite sure how I go about this, we run 2 careers events looking at how to go about applying for specialist training that we're running at the end of September and the start of October. These have been advertised to the F2s and are open also to any people that you've got doing F3 placements who are still not quite sure what they want to do or want a refresher about the application process. So please feel free to advertise those to any trainee that comes to you with any concerns about applying. There are also a couple of HEE careers webinars that are again on the UK FPO website that they can look at, which will give them further advice on how they go about applying to specialist training programs. So that's the current sort of worries from the F1s and the F2s. I think from your perspective as supervisors, there's a few things that are worth knowing about that just help the whole process of supervising run a bit smoother. And question at the bottom is, are the workshops available for QHB trainees also? I'm sure we can make them available. They are largely face-to-face, but we have been asked to put it on Microsoft Teams and record it, so we'll do that. But if they sort of apply to, if they get in touch with the postgrad team there, we can sort of see how we're doing for numbers. So back to secrets of the e-portfolio. One of the things that I say to all the F1s and all the F2s when they come to us is, please, please, please put your photo on your e-portfolio. We were quite sneaky this year in that we made them send us all a picture anyway. So if they don't upload one, we'll upload one for them. But if you're looking at your trainees' portfolio and they haven't got a photo, please ask them to do it. It takes 10 seconds. And it just makes it so much easier to put a face to a name if there's concerns about this person or that person, or this person's done particularly well. But they're so bad at it. And I don't know what the problem is with uploading your photo to your portfolio. So please encourage them to do that. One thing to think about that was something that was going to be introduced last year until the pandemic as something that would be mandatory, and I think is going to become mandatory, are these things called placement supervision groups. Now, the placement supervision groups sit as a little tab in the Horus e-portfolio for clinical supervisors to fill in. And because what we recognise is that, okay, as an educational supervisor, you'll meet the trainee, you'll get an overview. And as the clinical supervisor, you may well be working alongside this trainee quite a bit and get a good sense of what they're like, their strengths and weaknesses. But we do also recognise that there are circumstances where you as a clinical supervisor actually may have fairly limited contact with the trainee. And then when it comes to filling in the clinical supervisor's report at the end, it actually can be quite challenging because you may not know an awful lot about them. And so what we would encourage is for you as the clinical supervisor to complete these placement supervision groups. And what you do is you essentially ask a small number of people, 2 or 3 people, that the trainee works with closely. So whether it be the sister in charge of the ward, or one of the registrars, or one of the specialist trainees, to actually fill this in for them, to sort of say, look, this is what they're good at, this is what they can improve on. And it just gives a much rounded picture for when you, as the clinical supervisor, fill in their clinical supervisor end of placement reports. As I say, this hasn't been mandatory in the past, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does become in the future. And it's something that, as good practice, we should ideally aim to get into now. To be clear, these are distinct from the TABs, the team assessment of behaviours, that the trainees do. So the trainees send the tabs out to appropriate people to fill in. The placement supervision groups are sent out by the clinical supervisor to enable the clinical supervisor to give a good, rounded, honest opinion of the trainees. So please have a look at those, and please consider starting to use this year. The second thing, just to sort of touch on, are the revised curriculum mapping standards. So you'll be aware currently that the curriculum is split into 4. No, I can never get this right. 4. I'll come to it in a second. 4 domains essentially, with 20 subcategories to it. And in previous years, people have filled in reams and reams and reams and reams of evidence, or not in some cases, but generally speaking, lots and lots and lots and lots of evidence duplicated multiple times to say, I've covered the curriculum. In the last year, we revised how they needed to demonstrate that they completed the curriculum, so that we said that for each professional outcome, they needed to fill in a maximum of 5 items, and that any single item could be mapped to a maximum of 4 different domains, essentially. So it's trying to make sure that they are covering the curriculum in a better manner, essentially. And that, we'll come on to it in a minute, but that may well change well, that probably will change in the future. But it's worth us all, as educational supervisors, properly looking at the curriculum and making sure that the trainee is mapping to the curriculum. There are 2 other things that I just want to mention in terms of the portfolio that sit on there at the moment that tend not to get filled in. The trainees are very good at filling in their other SLEs, their supervised learning events, so their DOPs and their mini-KECs and their CBDs, and that's great. There are 2 other SLEs that were introduced just over a year ago that I think are going to become increasingly important over time. And these are something called the Learn and the Leader. The Leader does what it says on the tin. This is looking for leadership. So if the trainee is helping to sort of lead the ward round or a board round or something like that, or has led a meeting, they can ask either a clinical supervisor, educational supervisor, or a consultant to fill in a leader form. And over time, I think that this is something that may well become mandatory for them to do. The other form that we see there is called the Learn form. And oh, somebody's taken control of the meeting again. I've lost control of the meeting. I do hate it when people do that. I'll just re-upload this again. So these are the Learn forms. So the Learn form is looking to map specific things within their curriculum. So, for example, if the student is doing a presentation on end-of-life care, for example, or wants to discuss about end-of-life care or seen a patient, they can say to whoever's filling in the form, I'm specifically mapping this discussion that we're going to have for the evidence that I want to show for this specific piece on the curriculum. It doesn't quite fit with a CBD or a DOPS or a mini-KEX, but I want to evidence it, and this is where they can fill in this learn form. So the learn forms, again, not mandatory yet, but are just useful adjuncts to the SLEs that we have that allow the foundation doctors to demonstrate evidence towards their curriculum. So those are some tips that I would have for the current portfolio as it stands. Other secrets of the FY year that not everybody's always au fait with is that I just wanted to go through. The first thing is their taster leave for the F1s. Now the F1s don't get any study leave, but they do over their foundation program, over their foundation years, get up to 10 days of taster leave, and many of the F2s use their taster leave to get experience and demonstrate commitment to a speciality, for example. But actually the F1s can use this as well, so they can split their 10 days into 5 days in F1 and 5 days in F2. So if there is something very specific that they can only access in their F1 year, then we can approve it. You as educational supervisor has to approve it, and then it comes to me as the TPD to sort of give the overall approval for it. But it is something that not many F1s know about and not many supervisors know about. So that's top one secret. The second secret is this idea of the aspirational study budget. And this was something that was introduced last year for the F2s, and it is only for the F2s. And it was essentially saying, we will give you approximately £300 towards one course, 1 day for you to go on. And we advertise this to the F2s to sort of say, look, you don't have a study budget as such, you get your taster leave, but actually here's now £300 for you to use. And surprisingly few of them took it up. I think it sort of went in one ear and out the other a lot of the time, and we have re-emphasised this. And as far as I'm aware, that still stands for this year. This aspirational study budget still stands for the F2s, and it runs at about £300. So please encourage them to use that, because if we don't use it, we lose it. Other secrets to be aware of are that the F2s have to, for their ARCP, produce either a QIP or an audit, but the F1s can do it. So if an F1 says to you, I've done an audit or I've done a QIP, they can use that evidence next year for their F2 ARCP. What we would do is ask that you as educational supervisor just review that audit or that QIP to make sure that it looks appropriate, that it's not, I've audited 3 sets of notes, there's my audit. It has to be something that looks an appropriate thing that you would expect of an F2 doctor, but they can put that in their portfolio and they can update that. So that's the other thing. The final thing that's sort of new this year that you may well become increasingly aware of is this concept of self-development time. And this is part of the renegotiated junior doctors contract that all F2s must get 2 hours per week of self-development time to do things like audit and QIPs and get their portfolios up to speed. And this was initially trialled elsewhere and then introduced this year. And the rota coordinators, as you can imagine, were absolutely delighted to discover that they had to give the F2s this time. It will also be introduced for the F1s as a mandatory thing from next August, with advice that we should, where possible, put it in this year. Now, the F2s and F1s can't dictate when they take that time, and the idea being that they should still be on site to do this. We will make as much computer space available for them to do those activities as possible. But what they can't do is say, well, I've saved up 2 hours here, 2 hours here, 2 hours here, I'm going to have the day off, thanks. It is in our gift to decide when the 2 hours is. And what we've largely done is simply put it after their F2 teaching. And the idea for the F1s is going to be that we'll put it after their F1 teaching. And we hope to introduce that this year. We have no choice in this. They have to have it. It is part of their contract, and we're trying to introduce this as painlessly as possible. But we would appreciate any feedback that if it's this Thursday doesn't work at all, then we will look to sort of maybe shift it elsewhere for individuals. But that is something that is new and that we have to do. There's Jordan Henderson with the FIFA World Club Cup, I should say. That's the future. So we've done past, we've done present, we're going to do future now. Future things to be aware of. Having simply got to grips with the curriculum, it's likely to now change again next year. So from 2021, the curriculum is going to change, and we're going to move from 4 domains and 20 professional capabilities, that was the word I couldn't think of earlier, to 3 domains and 13 professional capabilities. And to just read out for you there, the 3 domains are that this is an accountable, capable and compassionate doctor. Domain number 2 is that they're going to be valuable members of the healthcare workforce. And domain number 3 is that they are professional and responsible for their own practice and portfolio development. And then within those 3 domains, the 13 professional capabilities will be able to drill down. And we will need to look very carefully at how our teaching programme within the trust meets those professional capabilities, so that the doctors can evidence this, as well as the stuff that they do on a day-to-day basis. But equally, this is where some of these newer SLEs, the learns and leaders and those sorts of things, may well come in for them to be able to evidence this. So just as you've got to grips with the current curriculum, it's going to change next year, and it is likely to be in this format. There is also a push to put increased emphasis on simulation training, which is challenging. We have a superb simulation department, as you'd be aware, at Derby, who are very helpful, and we are slowly getting more face-to-face back, so that all the foundation doctors can do all the simulation that they need. But there's likely to be an increased emphasis on simulation training, with 3 proposed sessions per foundation year, so 3 for the F1s and 3 for the F2s, looking at things like session on COPD, a session on the collapsed patient, a session on breaking bad news, those sorts of things. So again, from the foundation team locally, we're going to have to look at how we manage this and how we accommodate that, but also are there things that we can do within our individual departments to make sure that these requirements are going to be met, so that they can be mapped to the curriculum. So that's likely to be coming. That's me. I do just want to remind you that my beautiful Liverpool, who I've waited 30 years for patiently, are the current champions of England. But that's what we're doing in the past, that's what we're doing in present, and that's what's likely to happen in the future in foundation programme. And I'd be very pleased to take any questions that you've got, and hand back maybe to Tracy.
Thank you, Ian. Obviously, I'm delighted on your behalf for Liverpool, but really have no further interest. We have got a couple of questions that have come up. Sard is wondering if there are going to be safeguarding CBDs introduced to the foundation programme.
Not as far as I'm aware at the moment. It is likely, so the finer details of the professional capabilities are being ironed out, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some safeguarding in there. And I guess this is where doing these learn SLEs may well come in, so the trainee can say, I've seen something that flags up as safeguarding, and I'd like to do a learn on safeguarding, so that I can demonstrate that I've met that requirement in the curriculum. So as far as I'm aware, there are no specific safeguarding CBDs, but it would not be inappropriate for them to do that.
Thank you. And I think it's Dr. Laxmina Ryan has asked which ones are specific to F1. Are you still there, Dr. Laxmina? I wasn't sure what you were referring to. Which ones are specific to F1? Was that was something to do with getting taster days, I think, but I'm not sure.
So just to sort of go on taster days. So taster days are for trainees to get experiences that they're not necessarily getting in their placements. So for example, a good example is I get asked, can I do taster in PDD, for example? I'm thinking of applying to do paediatrics, but my paediatric placement is right at the end, by which time I'll have needed to apply for my specialist training run through. So if they come and do taster days with us, so it's ideally looking to get experience that they've not already had or can't get locally. We try and keep it as local as possible, so that they can't go and say, I'd like to go and do a week of skiing medicine in St. Moritz. We wouldn't approve that. But it's trying to get experiences that they're not necessarily getting in the placements that they're doing at the moment. As I say, they have a total of 10 days of taster leave, and no one has ever taken the full 10 days, as far as I'm aware. But the F1s can take 5 days, up to 5 days of the 10 days in their placement. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Ian. Has anybody got any further questions they'd like to ask Ian? I can't find anything in the chat. Does anybody want to ask in live? Yes, oh, there we go. Yes, please go ahead. Dr.
I want a little bit more clarification around these.
I can't hear. I'm afraid I can't hear the question. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
That's much better.
When you are presenting, F1s are seeking the taste days. I think there's a lot of feedback. I don't know why.
Yeah, try again.
If F1s want to seek taster days, you mentioned they have to be kind of specific for their F1 level. What do you exactly mean by that?
So what I mean is that it's the idea is that they if they have a specialist interest in something that they are not getting experience during that placement, they can say, I don't know, at Birmingham there's a particular unit that does XYZ, or at Derby I want to gain experience in a particular sort of, I don't know, something to do with IT. If there are experiences that not necessarily getting during their clinical experience, then they can apply to do those. And it can be very broad. And I say it has to be approved by the educational supervisor, but also we look at it as well to make sure it is appropriate. And we do approve the vast majority of taster leave. Things that we have declined before are somebody who wanted to go off and learn how to do botulinum injections to get rid of your wrinkles. Well, we didn't feel that was relevant to their experience as a foundation doctor, so we declined that. So it has to be something that is relevant to them achieving their competencies and them achieving their curriculum as a foundation doctor. Does that, I hope that makes some sort of sense.
And also, how long, means what's the maximum number of days they can go for one taster set area?
There isn't a maximum. I say they can take a maximum of 10 days across their 2 years and a maximum of 5 days in the F1 year. So some people will take 2 days or 3 days, or some people might take 5 days. So there is no limit to it. Clearly, it has to fit in with making sure that the service is still covered, so they do need it approved.
Thank you.
Ian, Vicky Taylor's asked if the
Yeah.
self-development time on the Thursday means they'll have less time spent on delivered teaching, i.e. the core teaching.
No, so no is the answer. So the idea is that the 2 hours will be added on after the core teaching, and this is a real issue for us. Is, you know, we've suddenly got to find 2 hours a week for all the F2s that they have to have, and we felt that probably the easiest way was to start with giving it them after their core sessions on the Thursday. But we're very keen to sort of hear any feedback. If that flags up real problems in terms of covering service for some areas, then we'll need to revisit that, and maybe put it elsewhere. And you know, we will be very flexible. And similarly for the F1s, the idea will be that to put their 1 hour after their teaching on the Tuesday, and that sort of seemed the simplest way forward for now. There was something else I did see.
There's lots of thank yous coming through. Some comparisons to the Oxford Deanery. Deborah, thank you very much. I've replied to Dr. Memon to say that yes, the self-development time applies whichever site the foundation programme trainees are at. It's a national thing.
Yeah.
I think that was all I could see.
But I think if you've got any questions, I think it's really helpful for us to sort of come and do this session. And I think doing it, I agree with people there saying doing it at lunchtime over this actually makes a lot more people come. But you now know what I look like. I'm the bloke in the Liverpool shirt, and if you see myself or Dr. McCulloch, who's the F2 TPD, if you have any questions, please drop into the office, drop me an email, and we'll try and help. And if you're having any particular issues or queries with or concerns with any of the foundation doctors, the sooner we know, the better, and that's really helpful for us.
And equally for those of you in Burton, because I can see a lot of you from Burton, thank you. You know that you can find Himaz and Ahmed in exactly the same way, and backed up very well with the medical education team there. So Carolyn in particular focusing on the foundation programme. So Ian, thank you very much. I think it's an excellent overview, pointing out a few things that we just need to focus on for this coming year. So thanks for your time. So for those of you who are still here, we will be sending out certificates. Nav will get onto that soon. We take this session and we'll make the session available for people who weren't able to join. Thank you for your comments about having it at lunchtime. We will try and do some sessions at lunchtime, but for some people that's not convenient, so we will still have some in the evenings, so it should be a mixture over the next year or so. And Ian, I will email you separately because I just need to think about what we're going to put on the certificate, so which areas of the GMC requirements we've covered in this session. So we'll get that sorted out before your certificates come out. So apologies for the early cross meeting, not quite sure what happened there. As you said, I think somebody pointed out that maybe one person was in 2 meetings, so apologies for that. And thank you very much for your time. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.
Take care.